Let's bring in the Daily Telegraph's political editor and Sky News Outsiders host, James Morrow, to discuss this and the other big stories today. James, former Prime Minister Paul Keating has responded to Penny Wong's comments today. He's released a statement this afternoon saying Australia's major foreign policy task is to soften that rigidity by encouraging both the US and China to find common cause and benefit in a peaceful and prosperous Pacific. He says nothing Penny Wong said today on Australia's behalf adds one iota of substance to that urgent task. Well, what do you think, James? I mean, this is a live feud unfolding here between Paul Keating and Penny Wong.
Yeah, well, I mean, the smartest investment I ever made was to buy a bunch of futures in popcorn farms, and it's just paying off greatly because these sorts of fights, which are totally popcorn worthy, keep popping up here. What Paul Keating is saying there, it's a far different tone than he was taking back at the press club. Remember, the press club was much more combative, belligerent, making all sorts of bizarre comparisons that were really, frankly, morally reprehensible, between the state of the Uyghurs in China and the indigenous people in Australia. This is, of course, him trying to sound more statesmanlike and reasonable. And on one level, what he's saying there, well, yeah, sure, of course, we want everybody to get along. We don't want there to be war. But while there are obviously legitimate questions that you can ask about the AUKUS deal and arrangement, and I never want to say that you can't do that or people shouldn't, the way he has gone about this has just shown himself. I think Penny Wong is absolutely dead right. He has diminished himself, his reputation, and his legacy, and he's still doing it.
Now, I want to turn to the dramatic arrest of a 21-year-old Air Force Guardsman on Friday for leaking sensitive government documents. Some say this is the worst national security breach since WikiLeaks. This is Jack Texera. He sent his Discord chat room mates a series of documents. It included detailed assessments of America's allies and enemies. But, James, there's also quite fascinating intelligence that we have since learned about Russia's war in Ukraine, about how America spies on its allies. I mean, there's intel about foreign governments, military movements, diplomatic efforts, even weapon sales. What do you think was the most interesting thing that has come to light here? And in particular, what light has this intel shed on Russia's invasion in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think, you mentioned WikiLeaks at the beginning, and I don't know that it is quite at that scale yet because I don't know that anybody's, died as a result of this intelligence leak yet. But that doesn't mean that the guy who did this is in any way a hero. No, just the opposite. And I think that should be sort of the starting point on all of these discussions here, that somebody who leaks classified information like that is an absolute criminal and should not be respected. But there's a lot of interesting stuff here. A lot of it is stuff that we kind of suspected. You mentioned allies spying on allies. We know that happens. We know that happens between all sorts of countries. So, that people sort of shrug it off as kind of being what statecraft does happen to be about these days, which is unfortunate, but the way it is. But then also the stuff on Russia and Ukraine. And it also, I think, confirms for a lot of people who have been, looking at the rosy sort of, Ukraine can just crush Russia and get back all its territory by the end of the year and all that stuff. Well, it puts a very different light on it. And I think that it does suggest that, beyond that sort of top level, gung-ho pro-Ukraine, get everything back thing that people talk about, there is going to be at some point some sort of settlement, I think, between the two parties in this that not everybody's going to be happy with.